The sun beat down mercilessly on Eleanor Montgomery's tear-stained face as she stood on the auction block, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin. The year was 1878, and Sweetwater, Arizona Territory, was as unforgiving as the desert that surrounded it. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as men shouted numbers that would determine her fate, reducing her worth to dollars and cents after her father's gambling debts had led to this moment of utter humiliation. $200 for the schoolteacher, shouted the auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth and eyes that never quite met those of the people he sold. Pretty little thing, educated too, can read and write and might even teach your young'uns something useful. Eleanor closed her eyes, unable to look at the sea of leering faces before her. Her father had fled town 3 days ago, leaving nothing but debts and a note telling her he was sorry. The bank had seized their modest home, and the saloon owner, Vernon Blackwood, had claimed her as payment for her father's substantial losses. Now she was being sold to whoever offered the most money, her future as uncertain as dust in the wind. $300. Called a voice from the back of the crowd. Eleanor's eyes flew open. The voice belonged to Vernon Blackwood himself, his expensive suit and gold watch gleaming in the sunlight. She had rejected his advances for months, and the cruel smile on his face told her exactly what her life would be like in his possession. $350, shouted another man, red-faced and swaying slightly from too much whiskey. $400. Blackwood countered, his voice hard with determination. The bidding continued, and Eleanor felt her legs weaken beneath her. These men weren't bidding on a schoolteacher, they were bidding on something else entirely. She had come west to teach, to build a new life after her mother's death. Now she faced a future worse than anything she could have imagined. $500, Blackwood yelled, silencing the crowd with the princely sum. The auctioneer grinned, revealing his blackened teeth. $500 going once, going twice, $1,000, came a deep, steady voice from the edge of the gathering. A hush fell over the crowd as they parted to reveal a tall man in trail-worn clothes, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He stood with one hand resting casually on his holstered pistol, the other holding the reins of a magnificent chestnut stallion. "And who might you be, stranger?" the auctioneer asked, clearly surprised by the interruption and the substantial bid. "The name's Hayes, Hunter Hayes." The man stepped forward, and Eleanor saw his face clearly for the first time. Weathered by sun and wind, it bore a thin scar along his jawline and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that commanded attention. Blackwood stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. "Now see here, Hayes, this woman is spoken for." "I've got business with her father ain't here," Hunter replied, his voice dangerously soft, "and I'm offering twice what you are." $1,500, Blackwood countered desperately. Hunter didn't hesitate. $2,000. He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch, tossing it to the auctioneer. "Count it if you like." The auctioneer fumbled with the pouch, his eyes widening as he verified the contents. "It's all here," he confirmed, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Blackwood sputtered in outrage, but the crowd was already dispersing, disappointed by the anticlimactic end to what had promised to be an entertaining spectacle. Hunter Hayes approached the auction block, his spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. Eleanor shrank back, unsure if her situation had improved or merely changed captors. "Miss," he said, his voice softer than before, "if you'll come with me." The auctioneer moved to untie her bonds, but Hunter waved him away and did it himself, his calloused fingers gentle as he freed her wrists. Eleanor rubbed at the angry red marks left by the rope, her mind racing with unanswered questions and fears. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Hunter glanced over his shoulder at Blackwood, who stood glaring at them from across the street. "Not here," he murmured. "Town's got too many ears." He guided her toward his horse, and Eleanor hesitated, suddenly terrified. What if this man was worse than Blackwood? What if he had just spent $2,000 for purposes even more sinister? As if reading her thoughts, Hunter stopped. "Miss Montgomery," he said, using her name for the first time, "I know you've got no reason to trust me, but I give you my word as a Hayes that I mean you no harm." He paused, then added quietly, "She's mine to protect now." The words were meant for Blackwood, who had approached again, but they reached Eleanor's ears and settled strangely in her heart. Not "she's mine" as a statement of ownership, but mine to protect a declaration of responsibility. Hunter helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was oddly reassuring as they rode away from the auction block, away from the crowd, and toward the unknown. They rode in silence through the dusty streets of Sweetwater, past the saloon where her father had gambled away their future, past the small schoolhouse where she had taught for just 2 short months before everything fell apart. Eleanor was acutely aware of the man behind her, of his steady breathing and the way he held the reins with hands that seemed both powerful and restrained. At the edge of town, Hunter guided his horse onto a trail that led into the foothills. Eleanor's fear returned, sharp and immediate. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "My ranch," he replied. "About 10 miles northwest of here. You'll be safe there." Safe, the words sounded hollow to her ears. "How can I possibly be safe with a stranger who just purchased me like cattle?" Hunter's body tensed behind her. "I didn't purchase you, Miss Montgomery. I paid off your father's debt. There's a difference." "Is there?" she challenged, finding courage in her desperation. "And what do you expect in return for your $2,000? The horse stopped abruptly. Hunter dismounted in one fluid motion, then looked up at her, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. "I expect nothing," he said flatly. "When we get to my ranch, you can decide what you want to do. If you want to leave, I'll give you enough money to get wherever you're going and see you safely to the stage depot." Eleanor stared at him, searching for deceit in his weathered face and finding none. "Why would you do that? Why would you help a stranger?" A shadow crossed his features. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be at the mercy of men like Blackwood." He adjusted his hat. "We should keep moving. It'll be dark soon, and these hills aren't safe at night." He remounted behind her, and they continued their journey in silence. The landscape changed as they rode, the barren desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. The air grew cooler as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Eleanor's mind raced with questions about the enigmatic man behind her. Who was Hunter Hayes? Why had he intervened? And most importantly, could she trust him? She had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Her father had seemed like a loving, responsible parent until grief over her mother's death had driven him to drink and gambling. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a structure appeared in the distance, a large, well-built ranch house with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows, creating an unexpectedly welcoming sight. "That's the Flying H," Hunter said, the first words he'd spoken in nearly an hour. "My home." As they approached, the front door of the house opened, and an older woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was stout and gray-haired, with a face that suggested she smiled often. "Mr. Hayes," she called. "You're back earlier than expected and with company, I see." Hunter dismounted and helped Eleanor down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. She wobbled slightly, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Mrs. Abernathy," Hunter said. "This is Miss Eleanor Montgomery. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's eyes widened slightly, but her smile never faltered. "Well, isn't that nice? I've just put supper on the table and there's plenty for all. Come in, both of you." Hunter led the way, carrying Eleanor's small valise that the auctioneer had allowed her to keep. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, colorful woven rugs, and shelves lined with books. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of beef stew filled the air. "Mrs. Abernathy is my housekeeper," Hunter explained. "She and her husband Tom take care of things around here. Tom's probably out checking the stock before supper." "Mrs." Abernathy bustled about, setting an extra place at the table. "Miss Montgomery, you must be exhausted. After supper, I'll show you to a room where you can rest." Eleanor nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how tired she truly was. The events of the day had left her drained, physically and emotionally. Hunter disappeared briefly and returned without his hat and gun belt, his dark hair slightly mussed. He pulled out a chair for Eleanor at the table, then seated himself across from her. "Mr. Hayes was raised right, despite what some folks might say," Mrs. Abernathy commented with a wink as she ladled stew into bowls. "His mama would be proud." A ghost of a smile touched Hunter's lips, softening his features. "Mrs. Abernathy likes to remind me of my manners whenever possible." "Someone has to," the older woman retorted good-naturedly. "Living out here with just Tom and the ranch hands, you'd all turn wild as the coyotes if I didn't keep after you." Their easy banter created an atmosphere so normal, so domestic, that Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly. The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables and tender beef, and she realized she hadn't eaten since early morning. As they ate, Mrs. Abernathy carried most of the conversation, talking about the ranch, the weather, and the latest news from town. Hunter contributed occasional comments, but seemed content to let his housekeeper do the talking. Eleanor remained mostly silent, still trying to process everything that had happened. After the meal, Mrs. Abernathy showed Eleanor to a bedroom at the end of the hallway. It was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains at the window. "There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up," the housekeeper said kindly. "And I've laid out a nightgown and robe that should fit you well enough for now. They belong to Mr. Hayes's sister when she visited last summer." "He has a sister?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Yes, Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, lives in Denver with her husband and children, visits once a year or so." Mrs. Abernathy patted Eleanor's arm. "Get some rest, dear. Things will look brighter in the morning, they always do." After the housekeeper left, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. She had woken up this morning expecting to be sold to the highest bidder, possibly to face a life of degradation and misery. Instead, she found herself in a comfortable bedroom in a stranger's home, her future still uncertain but no longer terrifying. She moved to the window and looked out at the moonlit landscape. The Flying H was larger than she had initially thought, with corrals, pastures, and outbuildings stretching into the distance. A group of horses grazed peacefully in a nearby paddock, their shapes silvered by moonlight. A movement caught her eye. Hunter, walking toward the barn, his long stride purposeful. He stopped suddenly and looked up, as if sensing her gaze. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Eleanor felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She stepped back from the window, confused by her reaction. This man was still a stranger, his motives still unclear. Gratitude was appropriate, even necessary, but anything more would be foolish. Eleanor washed her face and hands in the cool water from the pitcher, then changed into the borrowed nightgown. It was finer than anything she had owned, made of soft cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. As she slipped beneath the quilt, exhaustion overtook her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon. Eleanor awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Abernathy's cheerful voice. "Miss Montgomery, are you awake, dear?" "Yes, come in," Eleanor called, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The housekeeper entered, carrying a tray with coffee and a plate of biscuits. "I thought you might like some breakfast before you get dressed. Mr. Hayes said to let you sleep as long as you needed, but I figured you might be hungry when you woke." "Thank you, that's very kind." Eleanor accepted the tray gratefully. "Is Mr. Hayes about?" "He's been up since before dawn, checking on a new foal. The Flying H raises some of the finest horses in the territory." Mrs. Abernathy moved to the dresser where she had placed a folded bundle. "I've brought you some clothes. They're simple, but they should fit well enough until we can get your things from town." Eleanor's face fell. I don't have any things in town. Everything I owned was in our house, and the bank took it all. Mrs. Abernathy's expression softened with sympathy. Well then, we'll just have to make do with what we have here for now. Mr. Hayes said to tell you he'd like to speak with you when you're ready. He'll be in his study most of the morning. After the housekeeper left, Eleanor ate her breakfast and, dressed in the clothes, provided a simple blue cotton dress, slightly too large but serviceable, and a pair of sturdy boots that fit surprisingly well. She brushed her hair and pinned it up as neatly as she could without a mirror, then took a deep breath and went to find Hunter Hayes. The house was quiet as she made her way down the hallway. She paused at an open door, seeing Hunter seated at a desk, studying what appeared to be ledgers. He looked up at her footsteps, setting down his pencil. "Miss Montgomery," he said, rising, "I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you." She remained in the doorway, uncertain whether to enter. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "Please sit down, we have matters to discuss." Eleanor seated herself, folding her hands in her lap to stop them from trembling. In the clear light of morning, she could see Hunter Hayes more distinctly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. The scar along his jawline was thin but noticeable, extending from just below his ear to his chin. "First," he said, "I want to assure you again that you're free to leave whenever you wish. What happened yesterday doesn't create any obligation between us." "Then why did you do it?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. $2,000 is a fortune. Hunter's expression remained impassive. "I have my reasons. Let's just say I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. Do you make a habit of rescuing women from auction blocks?" She hadn't meant to sound sarcastic, but fear and confusion made her words sharper than intended. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, Miss Montgomery, you're the first." He opened a drawer in his desk and removed a small leather pouch, sliding it across to her. "There's $50 there. If you decide to leave, it should be enough to get you wherever you want to go." Eleanor stared at the pouch without touching it. "And if I stay?" "If you stay," he said carefully, "you could help Mrs. Abernathy with the house. She's getting on in years and could use an extra pair of hands, or given your experience, you could teach. There are several ranch families nearby with children who need educating. You would pay me to teach." The idea surprised her. "Of course, your skills have value, Miss Montgomery." Eleanor felt a surge of something like hope. To be treated as a person with value after being auctioned like property was unexpectedly affecting. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't need to decide anything today," Hunter replied. "Take some time to think about what you want." A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom Abernathy, a lean, weathered man with kind eyes, stood in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but Blackwood and his men just rode onto our property. 5 of them, all armed." Hunter rose immediately, his expression hardening. "Get the men. No one starts anything, but I want them ready." Tom nodded and disappeared. Hunter moved to a cabinet and withdrew a pistol, checking it before sliding it into his holster. "Stay inside," he told Eleanor, his voice brooking no argument. "Whatever you hear, don't come out until I come for you." Fear clenched her stomach. "This is because of me, isn't it?" "This is because Vernon Blackwood doesn't like being crossed," Hunter corrected. "And it's not your concern." He strode from the room, and Eleanor heard the front door open and close. Despite his instructions, she moved to the window, which offered a view of the yard where 5 riders had reined in their horses. Vernon Blackwood sat atop a black gelding, his city clothes incongruous against the backdrop of the ranch. Hunter stood on the porch, seemingly relaxed but with one hand resting near his pistol. From various positions around the yard, ranch hands appeared, some carrying rifles, others simply watching with wary expressions. "Hayes," Blackwood called, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "I've come for the woman. She belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone, Blackwood," Hunter replied, his voice level. "The debt's been paid fair and square." "There was nothing fair about it. You interfered in business that wasn't yours." Blackwood's face was flushed with anger. "Your business was selling a free woman into bondage," Hunter said, contempt evident in his tone. "I made a higher bid. The transaction is complete. Blackwood sneered. So you're keeping her for yourself, the righteous Hunter Hayes buying a woman just like the rest of us would. The lady is under my protection, Hunter stated firmly. Nothing more. Now I suggest you leave my property before this gets unpleasant. One of Blackwood's men moved his hand toward his gun, but Blackwood raised a hand to stop him. Not today, he said, his eyes never leaving Hunter. But this isn't over, Hayes. Nobody takes what's mine. She was never yours, Hunter replied. Now get off my land. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might refuse. Then, with a contemptuous flick of his reins, he turned his horse and rode away, his men following reluctantly. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Hunter remained on the porch until the riders disappeared from view, then turned and walked back toward the house. Their eyes met through the window, and Eleanor didn't look away, acknowledging that she had disobeyed his instruction to stay away from the windows. When he entered the study a few minutes later, she expected anger. Instead, he merely sighed. I should have known you wouldn't hide, he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. Teachers are notoriously stubborn. Is that what your sister told you? Eleanor asked, remembering Mrs. Abernathy's mention of Elizabeth Thornton. A brief smile crossed his face. As a matter of fact, yes, Lizzie taught school before she married. The shared moment of humor faded quickly. Will they be back? Eleanor asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Hunter's expression grew serious again. Not today, probably not tomorrow, but eventually, yes. Blackwood isn't the type to forget a grudge. Then I should leave, she said quietly. I've brought enough trouble to your door already. Where would you go? He asked bluntly. Back to Sweetwater, where Blackwood controls the sheriff and half the businesses. To another town, alone and without resources? Put that way, her options seemed bleak indeed. I could find work as a teacher elsewhere, she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. You could, Hunter agreed, and I'll help you do that if it's what you truly want. But consider staying, at least until we're sure Blackwood has moved on to some other obsession. The Flying H is well defended, and you'd be safe here. Eleanor studied him, trying to understand this man who had risked so much for a stranger. Why do you care what happens to me? Hunter's gaze held hers steadily. Because in this world, Miss Montgomery, we all need someone to stand up for us sometimes. I had someone once. Now I try to do the same when I can. The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. For the first time since her father had abandoned her, Eleanor felt as though she wasn't completely alone. I'll stay, she decided. For now, and I would like to teach if there are children who need it. Hunter nodded, seemingly pleased with her decision. I'll send word to the neighboring ranches. We can use the front parlor as a schoolroom until something more suitable can be arranged. As the days passed, Eleanor settled into life at the Flying H with surprising ease. Each morning, she rose early to help Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast for Hunter and the ranch hands. By 9 o'clock, children from neighboring ranches began to arrive, brought by parents grateful for the opportunity to provide education for their offspring. Eleanor taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history to 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Hunter provided books, slates, and other supplies without complaint, converting the front parlor into a functional classroom. He rarely interrupted during school hours, but Eleanor often caught him watching from the doorway, a thoughtful expression on his face. In the evenings, after the children had gone home and supper was finished, Eleanor found herself drawn to Hunter's extensive library. It was there that he found her one night, a week after her arrival, engrossed in a volume of Tennyson's poetry. My father's collection, he said from the doorway, startling her. He believed even cowboys should have culture. Eleanor closed the book carefully. He was right. These are wonderful books. Hunter entered the room, moving to a cabinet that held several decanters. Brandy, he offered, holding up one of the crystal containers. No, thank you, she declined. I've never acquired a taste for spirits. He nodded, pouring a small amount for himself before taking a seat opposite her. How are you finding the teaching? Rewarding, she answered honestly. Your neighbor's children are bright and eager to learn for the most part. Except for young Jimmy Wilson, Hunter said with a hint of amusement. He'd rather be roping calves than learning his letters, if I'm not mistaken. Eleanor laughed softly. You've noticed. Yes, Jimmy is more interested in becoming a cowboy than a scholar, but he's trying, which is all I can ask. They fell into a comfortable silence, the only sounds the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Eleanor found herself studying Hunter covertly, noting the way the firelight played across his features, softening the harder edges of his face. "May I ask you something personal, Mr. Hayes?" she ventured after a while. He raised an eyebrow. "You may ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough." She hesitated, then continued. "How did you come to own the Flying H, Mrs. Abernathy mentioned your father's books, but she's otherwise been quite discreet about your family." Hunter swirled the brandy in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "My father built this ranch from nothing. Came west after the war, the Mexican War, not the more recent unpleasantness, with just a few dollars and a dream. Met my mother, who was the daughter of a Spanish land grant holder down near the border. Together they built the Flying H into one of the most successful ranches in the territory." He took a sip of his brandy before continuing. "They died 10 years ago. Fever took them both within days of each other. I was 20 then, just back from a cattle drive to Kansas. Suddenly, I was responsible for the ranch, my 16-year-old sister, and 20 ranch hands who depended on the Flying H for their livelihood." "That must have been overwhelming," Eleanor said softly. Hunter's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "It was. But the alternative was losing everything my parents had built, so I learned quickly." "And your sister?" "Elizabeth." "Lizzie stayed until she was 18, then went to Denver to attend a ladies' seminary. Met John Thornton there, he's in banking, and married him a year later. They have 3 children now." There was unmistakable affection in his voice when he spoke of his sister and her family. "You must miss them," Eleanor observed. "I do," he admitted, "but Denver isn't so far and they visit when they can." He set down his glass and regarded her thoughtfully. "What about you, Miss Montgomery? You've told me you came west to teach, but little else about yourself." Eleanor twisted the ring on her finger, her mother's ring, the only valuable thing she still possessed. "There isn't much to tell. I grew up in Ohio. My mother died 3 years ago of consumption. My father was a clerk in a shipping office, respectable but not wealthy. When he began drinking and gambling, his employers let him go. He convinced me that we should go west for a fresh start." She paused, the memories still painful. "We arrived in Sweetwater 6 months ago. I secured a position at the school, and for a while, things were better. Father was sober, working odd jobs. Then he started visiting the saloon again, playing cards with men like Blackwood. You know the rest. Have you heard from him since he left?" Hunter asked gently. Eleanor shook her head. "No, and I don't expect to. He's run from his problems before, though never quite so dramatically." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've accepted that I'm on my own now." "Not entirely on your own," Hunter corrected quietly. "You have friends here." The sincerity in his voice warmed her in a way the fire couldn't. "Thank you," she said, meaning it, "for everything." The next morning, Eleanor was surprised to find Hunter waiting for her after breakfast, dressed for riding and holding a second hat. "I thought you might like to see more of the Flying H than just the house and yard," he explained. "If you're not too busy preparing for your students." "I'd like that very much," she replied, pleased by the invitation, "but I haven't ridden in years and never very well." "I've saddled Daisy for you," he said. "She's gentle as a lamb and has carried children and inexperienced riders many times." Outside, 2 horses waited, Hunter's chestnut stallion and a dappled gray mare with kind eyes. Hunter helped Eleanor mount, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate her height and showing her how to hold the reins properly. "Comfortable?" he asked, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Yes, I think so," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his touch. Hunter mounted his own horse with fluid grace, and they set off at an easy walk. The day was perfect for riding, clear blue sky, gentle breeze, and temperatures mild for early summer. "The Flying H covers about 20,000 acres, Hunter explained as they rode. "Most of it grazing land for cattle, but we also grow hay and some grain for the horses." They passed fields where men were working, pastures where cattle grazed, and eventually came to a rise that offered a panoramic view of the ranch and the mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," Eleanor breathed, taking in the vista. "I can see why your father chose this land." "He always said he fell in love with this view before he ever met my mother," Hunter said with a smile, though he claimed she was an even more breathtaking sight. They dismounted to rest the horses, and Hunter spread a blanket on the ground. From his saddlebags, he produced a canteen of water, some apples, and a small parcel of Mrs. Abernathy's cookies. "She insisted I bring these," he explained, unwrapping the cookies. "Said no outing is complete without something sweet." They sat in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the food and the view. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at her companion, noticing how relaxed he seemed away from the house and its responsibilities. "May I ask about your scar?" She ventured, curiosity finally overcoming politeness. Hunter's hand went to his jaw, fingers tracing the thin line. "A patchy arrow, 7 years ago. I was out checking fence lines alone, foolish of me, and rode into a hunting party. They weren't looking for trouble, but I startled them, and one of them loosed an arrow before realizing I wasn't a threat." "How terrible." "Not really," he said with a shrug. "It was a minor wound, and they actually took me to their healer. I spent 3 days with them, learning more about their ways than most white men ever know. The chief and I reached an understanding. The Flying H respects their hunting grounds and they leave our cattle alone. It's worked well for both sides." Eleanor was impressed. "In Ohio, Indians were distant figures from history books or newspaper stories, usually portrayed as savages. Hunter spoke of them with respect as neighbors with whom one could negotiate and coexist. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Oh, and what did you expect, Miss Montgomery?" There was amusement in his voice. She considered the question. "I'm not sure. When you appeared at that auction, you seemed like something from a dime novel, the mysterious stranger riding to the rescue." Hunter laughed, a rich sound that transformed his face. "I assure you, I'm far more ordinary than any dime novel hero, just a rancher trying to do right by his land and his people." "There's nothing ordinary about what you did for me," Eleanor said softly. "Most men would have looked the other way." His expression grew serious. "Most men haven't seen what I have. During the war, the recent one, I saw too many people treated as property, as less than human. I swore then that I would never stand by silently when I saw such things happening." Eleanor realized he was speaking of slavery and the Civil War. "You fought for the Union?" "I did. 2 years with the cavalry until a rebel bullet found my shoulder and sent me home." He rotated his left shoulder slightly, as if the old wound still troubled him occasionally. "My father wanted to enlist," Eleanor said, "but my mother was already ill by then and he couldn't leave us." Hunter nodded in understanding. Many men faced that difficult choice. The war asked terrible sacrifices of everyone, North and South. Their conversation turned to lighter topics after that. Hunter pointed out landmarks on the horizon and told stories about the early days of the ranch. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn to his dry humor and thoughtful observations. As the sun climbed higher, Hunter reluctantly suggested they return to the house. "Your students will be arriving soon, and Mrs. Abernathy will scold me if I make their teacher late." The ride back was as pleasant as the outward journey, though Eleanor was beginning to feel the effects of being in the saddle for hours after such a long absence from riding. When they reached the ranch yard, Hunter dismounted quickly and moved to help her down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure as he lifted her from the saddle. Eleanor's legs, stiff from the ride, buckled slightly as her feet touched the ground, and she found herself pressed against his chest, her hands clutching his shoulders for balance. For a breathless moment they stood thus, faces inches apart. Eleanor could feel the steady beat of Hunter's heart beneath her palm, could see flecks of gray in his blue eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of awareness that had been building since that first day. The spell was broken by the sound of approaching horses, the first of her students arriving for the day's lessons. Hunter stepped back, releasing her waist but steadying her with a hand at her elbow until he was sure she could stand unassisted. "Thank you for the tour," Eleanor said, her voice not quite steady. "My pleasure," he replied, his eyes still holding hers. "Perhaps we can do it again sometime." Before she could respond, Jimmy Wilson came barreling into the yard on his pinto pony, whooping with boyish enthusiasm, oblivious to the moment he had interrupted. The day's lessons proceeded as usual, but Eleanor found it difficult to concentrate. Her mind kept returning to that moment in the yard, to the feeling of Hunter's hands at her waist and the look in his eyes that had made her heart race. She was attracted to him, there was no use denying it to herself. Hunter Hayes was unlike any man she had known, principled, intelligent, kind beneath his reserved exterior. But he was also her benefactor, her employer of sorts. Any feelings beyond gratitude and friendship would be inappropriate and likely unwelcome. As the days passed, Eleanor tried to maintain a proper distance, focusing on her teaching and helping Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks. Hunter seemed to be doing the same, spending long hours with the ranch hands or in his study with the account books. When they did interact, he was unfailingly polite but careful not to repeat the intimacy of their ride. 2 weeks after her arrival at the Flying H, Eleanor was teaching her students about geography when Tom Abernathy appeared at the parlor door, his expression troubled. "Miss Montgomery," he said, "there's a man here asking for you, says he's your father." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop for a moment. "My father, here?" Tom nodded. "He's waiting on the porch. Mr. Hayes isn't back from the north pasture yet, so I wasn't sure what to do." "It's all right, Tom. I'll speak with him." Eleanor turned to her students. "Children, please continue reading the chapter on the Rocky Mountains. I'll return shortly." She followed Tom to the front porch, her stomach knotted with apprehension. There, looking thinner and more haggard than when she had last seen him, stood Harold Montgomery. "Father," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Eleanor." He removed his hat, revealing hair that had gone almost completely gray. "You're looking well." Tom hovered protectively nearby until Eleanor nodded to indicate she would be fine. Once they were alone, she crossed her arms and regarded her father with a mixture of anger and residual affection. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "How did you find me?" "Word travels," he replied. "I heard in a town up north that Hayes had bought a schoolteacher at auction in Sweetwater. Wasn't hard to figure out it was you." He hesitated, then added, "I came to make sure you were all right." "Now," Eleanor couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "You're concerned about my welfare now after selling me to pay your gambling debts." Her father flinched. "I never meant for that to happen, Ellie. I thought I could win enough to pay Blackwood back. When I lost everything, I panicked and ran. It was cowardly, I know that." "Cowardly doesn't begin to describe it," she said coldly. "Do you have any idea what would have happened to me if Mr. Hayes hadn't intervened?" "I've heard he's a good man," her father said, as if that somehow absolved him of responsibility. "They say he treats his people well." "Yes, he is a good man, better than you deserve to call friend or acquaintance." Eleanor realized she was trembling with suppressed emotion. "Why are you really here, father? If it's money you want, it's not money," he interrupted, looking genuinely hurt by the suggestion. "I wanted to see you to apologize, and—" He hesitated, then continued in a rush, "to warn you, Blackwood is looking for you. He's offered a reward for information on your whereabouts." A chill ran through Eleanor. "How do I know you haven't already told him where I am?" "Because despite what you think of me, I do love you, Eleanor. You're all I have left of your mother." His eyes, so like her own, filled with tears. "I would never deliberately put you in danger." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered and difficult to repair. "What do you intend to do now?" "I've got work on a ranch near Santa Fe," he said. "It's honest work, good pay. I'm staying sober, Ellie, one day at a time." "I've heard those promises before," she reminded him quietly. "I know, and I don't blame you for doubting me." He replaced his hat, preparing to leave. "I just wanted to see that you were safe and to warn you about Blackwood. He's a dangerous man when crossed." "We're aware of that," came Hunter's voice from behind Eleanor. She turned to see him standing at the bottom of the porch steps, dust from the trail still on his clothes, his expression hard as he regarded Harold Montgomery. Mr. Hayes, her father said, nervously twisting his hat in his hands. I want to thank you for what you did for my daughter. I didn't do it for you, Hunter replied coldly. Your daughter deserved better than being sold to pay your debts. Harold flinched at the blunt words but didn't argue. You're right. She deserves better than me as a father, too. I'm trying to change that for what it's worth. It's worth very little at this point, Hunter said, but it's not my place to judge. That's between you and Miss Montgomery. He looked at Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. Do you want to speak with your father privately? Eleanor appreciated that he was giving her the choice. No, she decided. I think we've said all that needs saying for now. Harold nodded, accepting her decision with resignation. I understand. If you ever need me, Ellie, I'll be at the Circle J Ranch near Santa Fe for the next few months at least. He hesitated, then added, Take care of yourself, daughter. With that, he descended the porch steps, giving Hunter a wide berth, and mounted a tired-looking bay horse tethered nearby. Eleanor watched him ride away, her emotions a tangled mess of anger, grief, and a reluctant thread of hope that perhaps this time his promises of change might be genuine. Are you all right? Hunter asked quietly when her father had disappeared from view. Yes, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. He says Blackwood is looking for me, offering a reward for information. Hunter's jaw tightened. That doesn't surprise me. Blackwood isn't the type to give up easily. He studied her face with concern. Do you believe your father came to warn you or for some other reason? I want to believe he came out of genuine concern, she admitted, but I've been disappointed by him too many times to trust his motives completely. Understandable. Hunter hesitated, then added, for what it's worth, he seemed sincere, frightened for you even. Eleanor was surprised by his assessment. You saw that, even though you were angry with him. Being angry with someone doesn't mean you can't see their true feelings, Hunter said with a hint of a smile. And I've gotten good at reading people over the years. Had to, in my line of work. Eleanor realized that her students were probably wondering where she had gone. I should get back to my class, she said. Hunter nodded. Of course, we can discuss this further this evening if you wish. She returned to the parlor to find her students whispering among themselves, clearly curious about the visitor. Eleanor forced a smile and resumed the geography lesson, though her thoughts remained on her father's warning and what it might mean for her future at the Flying H. That evening, after the students had gone home and supper was finished, Hunter invited Eleanor to join him in his study. He had clearly given considerable thought to the situation, for he had a map spread out on his desk and several letters ready for posting. I've been thinking about Blackwood, he began without preamble. If he's offering rewards for information, it's only a matter of time before someone talks. This ranch is well known, and many people in the territory know I purchased a woman's contract at auction. Eleanor felt a chill at his matter-of-fact assessment. What do you suggest? We have several options, Hunter said, indicating the map. You could leave the territory entirely. I have contacts in California who would help you establish yourself as a teacher there, far beyond Blackwood's reach. The thought of leaving sent an unexpected pang through Eleanor's heart. And the other options? You could go to my sister in Denver. Lizzie would welcome you, and Blackwood has no influence there. Both options involve my leaving the Flying H, Eleanor observed quietly. Hunter met her gaze steadily. Yes, it would be the safest course for you. But not for you, she countered. If I leave, Blackwood might turn his attention to you, blame you for helping me escape. I can handle Blackwood, Hunter said dismissively. I'm more concerned about your safety, and I'm concerned about yours, Eleanor replied with unexpected vehemence. I won't have you facing danger because of me. Hunter studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. There is a third option, he said finally. You could stay here and we could face whatever comes together. The Flying H is defensible and my men are loyal. But I won't pretend there's no risk. I'm not afraid of risk, Eleanor said. I'm afraid of running away and spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I'm afraid of leaving the home and the work I've come to love. The words slipped out before she could consider their implications. Hunter's eyes widened slightly and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. The Flying H feels like home to you, he asked softly. Yes, she admitted. More than anywhere has since my mother died. The children, Mrs. Abernathy, Tom, the ranch hands, they've all made me feel welcome, and you. She hesitated, then continued with quiet honesty, you've shown me more kindness and respect than any man I've known. Hunter rose from his chair and moved around the desk to stand before her. If you choose to stay, Eleanor, I will do everything in my power to protect you. Not because I bought your contract, not because I feel responsible for you, but because I have come to care for you a great deal. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a tremor through her. Hunter, she said, testing the intimacy of using his name as well, I care for you too, more than I should, perhaps. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. There is no should or shouldn't in matters of the heart, only what is true. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes that matched her own. I want to stay, she whispered. Whatever comes, I want to face it here with you. Hunter's free hand came up to touch her cheek, a feather-light caress that made her breath catch. Then stay, he said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Eleanor knew that if she leaned forward just slightly, their lips would meet. She wanted it with an intensity that surprised her. But a knock at the study door broke the spell. Tom Abernathy stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's a messenger from town. Says Sheriff Daniels wants to speak with you tomorrow about a complaint from Mr. Blackwood. Hunter stepped back from Eleanor, though he didn't release her hand. What kind of complaint? Kidnapping, Tom replied grimly. He's claiming you took Miss Montgomery against her will. Hunter's laugh held no humor. Of course he is. Tell the messenger I'll be there at noon tomorrow. After Tom left, Hunter turned back to Eleanor, his expression grave. It seems Blackwood is making his move sooner rather than later. This is absurd, Eleanor said, anger rising within her. You didn't kidnap me. If anything, you saved me from being kidnapped by him. Blackwood has influence with Sheriff Daniels, Hunter explained. The law in Sweetwater often bends to accommodate those with money and power. Then I'll go with you tomorrow, Eleanor declared. I'll tell the sheriff myself that I'm here of my own free will. Hunter shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. If you set foot in Sweetwater, Blackwood could try to seize you regardless of what the sheriff decides. I won't risk that. But without my testimony, Eleanor, he interrupted gently, trust me in this. I know how to handle Daniels. He's not a bad man, just a weak one. With the right approach, he'll dismiss Blackwood's complaint. She wanted to argue further but saw the determination in Hunter's eyes. Promise me you'll be careful, she said instead. I promise. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. This isn't the first time Blackwood and I have crossed paths. It won't be the last. The next morning, Eleanor watched anxiously as Hunter prepared to ride to Sweetwater. He dressed more formally than usual, in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best hat. The only concession to potential danger was the pistol at his hip, which he checked carefully before holstering. I should be back by mid-afternoon, he told her as he mounted his horse. Try not to worry, Daniels is more reasonable than most in Blackwood's pocket. Be safe, she replied, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her since the messenger's arrival. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Eleanor tried to focus on teaching, but her mind kept wandering to Hunter in Sweetwater, facing accusations because of her. The children sensed her distraction and were more restless than usual, compounding her anxiety. When school finished for the day, she found herself repeatedly checking the road for signs of Hunter's return. Mrs. Abernathy, noticing her concern, attempted to distract her with household tasks, but Eleanor's heart wasn't in them. He'll be back soon enough, the housekeeper said kindly. Mr. Hayes can handle himself in town. I know, Eleanor replied, forcing a smile. It's just that he's facing these troubles because of me. Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand. Don't you fret about that. The boss has been happier since you came than I've seen him in years. Whatever trouble comes with you, he considers it well worth it. Before Eleanor could respond to this surprising revelation, they heard the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders, not just Hunter alone. They hurried to the porch to see Hunter returning with 3 ranch hands who had accompanied him for protection. Relief flooded through Eleanor at the sight of him, unharmed and apparently in good spirits. He dismounted with his usual grace and came to meet her on the porch, removing his hat as he approached. "Everything went well?" she asked anxiously. "Better than expected," he confirmed with a smile. Daniels dismissed Blackwood's complaint outright. "It seems our esteemed sheriff has grown tired of being used to settle personal vendettas." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor exclaimed, her relief palpable. "There's more," Hunter added, his smile widening. "While I was in town, I received a telegram from the territorial governor. It seems my name has been put forward for consideration as the new circuit judge for this district." Eleanor stared at him in surprise. "Judge Hayes, I had no idea you had legal training." "I studied law before the war," he explained. "Never practiced formally, but I've maintained my knowledge over the years. The current judge is retiring, and apparently my name came up as a potential replacement." "That's a great honor," Eleanor said sincerely. "Will you accept if it's offered?" Hunter hesitated. "I'm considering it. The position would allow me to help bring real justice to the territory, not the kind that bends to men like Blackwood." His expression grew more serious. "But it would also mean traveling the circuit regularly, being away from the Flying H for weeks at a time." The implications of his words hung between them. Being away from the ranch meant being away from her as well. "You should accept," Eleanor said firmly, pushing aside her personal feelings. "You would make an excellent judge, fair and principled." Hunter studied her face. "The position wouldn't start until fall. A lot can change before then." There was something in his tone, a hint of meaning beyond his words, that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. Before she could respond, Mrs. Abernathy called them in for supper, the moment passing like so many others between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. As summer progressed, life at the Flying H settled into a pleasant routine. Eleanor's students improved under her guidance, and she found genuine fulfillment in teaching them. The threat from Blackwood seemed to recede after the sheriff's dismissal of his complaint, though Hunter maintained extra vigilance around the ranch. Eleanor and Hunter grew closer with each passing day, their conversations longer, their shared glances more meaningful. Yet neither seemed willing to take the final step to acknowledge what was developing between them, a hesitation born of their unusual circumstances, and perhaps a fear of disrupting the harmony they had found. One evening in late July, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing welcome rain to the parched land. Eleanor stood on the covered porch, watching lightning illuminate the distant peaks and listening to the soothing rhythm of raindrops on the roof. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Hunter's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, a steaming cup in each hand. "I've always loved storms," she admitted, "the power of nature so beyond our control." He joined her at the railing, offering one of the cups. "Hot chocolate, Mrs. Abernathy's special recipe." "Thank you." She accepted the cup gratefully, the sweet aroma rising with the steam. "I haven't had hot chocolate since I was a girl." They stood in companionable silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the storm. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Eleanor jumped slightly, and Hunter's arm went around her shoulders in a protective gesture that felt entirely natural. She didn't pull away, instead leaning slightly into his warmth. "I received word today that the judge's position is officially mine if I want it," he said after a moment. "I have a week to decide." Eleanor looked up at him, studying his profile in the dim light. "And have you decided?" "Not yet." He met her gaze, his eyes serious. "There are considerations beyond the job itself. The ranch," she suggested, among other things. His arm tightened slightly around her shoulders. "Eleanor, these past 2 months, having you here, it's changed things for me, changed me." Her heart began to race at the earnestness in his voice. "Changed you how? Before you came, the Flying H was just a place I worked, a responsibility I inherited. Now it feels like a home again." He set his cup on the porch railing and turned to face her fully. "You've brought something back that I thought was lost when my parents died, a sense of family, of belonging." Eleanor placed her own cup beside his, her hands trembling slightly. "I feel that too," she whispered. "I never expected to find such happiness here after everything that happened." Hunter took her hands in his touch gentle yet sure. "I don't want to lose that happiness. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," she promised, her voice catching with emotion. "Whatever you decide about the judge's position, I'll be here. The Flying H is my home now, too." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the hope and longing in Hunter's eyes. "Eleanor Montgomery," he said softly, "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you on that auction block, so brave despite your fear." The words she had longed to hear, yet hardly dared hope for, washed over her like the rain nourishing the thirsty land. "And I've been falling in love with you since you said I was yours to protect," she replied, her heart in her voice. "Not as a possession, but as someone you valued." Hunter's hands released hers to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the question both courtly and deeply intimate. In answer, Eleanor rose on tiptoe, closing the distance between them. Their lips met as thunder rumbled overhead, a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the passion they had both restrained for so long. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she wound her arms around his neck, surrendering to the feelings that had been building since that first day. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eleanor. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." "I love you too," she whispered, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. "And yes, oh yes, I want that life with you." The rain continued to fall, but they hardly noticed, lost in each other and the promise of a future together. News of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and the surrounding community. Mrs. Abernathy was particularly delighted, confessing to Eleanor that she had been hoping for such an outcome since Hunter had first brought her to the Flying H. "He needed someone like you," the housekeeper said as they prepared for the small engagement dinner Hunter had planned. "Someone with spirit and kindness in equal measure. The ranch has prospered under his care, but he was lonely, though he'd never admit it." "I was lonely too," Eleanor admitted. "Even before my father's troubles, I felt as though I was merely existing, not truly living. Hunter changed that." The engagement dinner was a joyous occasion, attended by neighboring ranchers and their families, many of whose children Eleanor taught. Hunter had sent word to his sister in Denver, who replied with a telegram full of congratulations and promises to visit as soon as possible. As the evening progressed, Hunter drew Eleanor aside to a quiet corner of the parlor. "I've made my decision about the judge's position," he told her. "And?" She prompted when he hesitated. "I'm going to accept it," he said. "Not just for the honor or the responsibility, but because it will allow me to make the territory safer for everyone, including you. Blackwood may have retreated for now, but men like him don't give up easily." Eleanor nodded in understanding. "I'm proud of you," she said sincerely. "You'll be an excellent judge. But it will mean being away from home regularly," he reminded her, watching her face carefully. "From you," she smiled, touching his cheek gently. "Then we'll treasure our time together all the more, and perhaps occasionally, if my students can spare me, I might travel with you on the circuit." The relief in his eyes was evident. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already spoken with Tom about managing the ranch more independently when I'm away." "You seem to have thought of everything," she teased lightly. "Not quite everything," Hunter replied with unusual hesitation. "There's still the matter of your father." Eleanor's smile faded. "What about him?" "I think we should invite him to the wedding," Hunter said carefully. "Despite everything, he is your only family." Eleanor was silent for a moment, considering his suggestion. Her feelings toward her father remained complicated, anger mingled with lingering affection and the faint hope that he might truly be changing his ways. "Would you really want him there?" she asked finally. "After what he did?" "What I want is for you to be happy," Hunter replied. "If having him there would bring you joy, or at least closure, then yes, I want him there. If his presence would only cause you pain, then we'll forget the idea." His willingness to put her feelings first touched Eleanor deeply. "Let's invite him," she decided. "As you said, he is my only family." And perhaps seeing us married will help him understand that something good came from his worst mistake. Hunter nodded, clearly pleased with her decision. I'll send a letter to the Circle J Ranch tomorrow. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones. Hunter traveled to the territorial capital to accept the judge's position officially, returning with his formal appointment papers and a beautiful engagement ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Eleanor continued teaching while also working with Mrs. Abernathy on preparations for the ceremony, which would take place at the Flying H in early September. A letter arrived from Harold Montgomery, accepting the invitation to the wedding with obvious surprise and gratitude. His handwriting was steadier than Eleanor remembered, and the letter contained no excuses or justifications, only a simple acknowledgement of his failings and a promise to honor her choice of husband. The day before the wedding, Elizabeth Thornton arrived from Denver with her husband and children. The resemblance between brother and sister was striking, the same blue-gray eyes and determined chin, though Elizabeth's features were softer, more feminine versions of Hunter's. "So you're the schoolteacher who captured my brother's heart," Elizabeth said warmly, embracing Eleanor as though they were already sisters. "I've been trying to find him a suitable wife for years, and all it took was a chance encounter at an auction block." "Lizzie," Hunter warned, though there was no real annoyance in his tone. "Oh, hush," his sister retorted good-naturedly. "Eleanor understands my meaning. Sometimes fate works in the strangest ways." Indeed, Eleanor did understand. The circumstances of their meeting had been dreadful, yet she couldn't regret them, not when they had led to such happiness. Life's paths were unpredictable, sometimes painfully so, but occasionally they led to unexpected joy. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air. Eleanor dressed in the bedroom that would soon be hers and Hunter's together, assisted by Elizabeth and Mrs. Abernathy. Her gown was simple but elegant, ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from Denver based on Elizabeth's recommendations. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth said, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers in Eleanor's hair. "My brother won't know what hit him." A knock at the door preceded Tom Abernathy's voice. "Miss Montgomery, your father is here." Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Send him in, please, Tom." Harold Montgomery entered hesitantly, hat in hand, wearing what was clearly a new suit purchased for the occasion. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening. "Ellie," he breathed, "you look just like your mother on our wedding day." The simple statement, delivered with such genuine emotion, broke through the last of Eleanor's reserve. She crossed the room and embraced her father, feeling his arms close around her tentatively, then with growing confidence. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," he replied, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Though I don't deserve to be here." Eleanor drew back to look at him. He seemed older than when she had last seen him, but also somehow more substantial, less like the shadow of a man he had become in recent years. "Are you still at the Circle J?" she asked. He nodded. "The foreman made me head wrangler last month. Seems I have a way with the more difficult horses." There was a touch of pride in his voice that Eleanor hadn't heard in a very long time. "I'm glad," she said sincerely. "And you're staying sober, one day at a time," he confirmed. "It's not always easy, but I think of you, of how I failed you, and it helps me stay the course." Mrs. Abernathy tactfully suggested that she and Elizabeth should check on the final preparations, leaving father and daughter alone. "I've never properly apologized," Harold said once they were gone, "for what I did to you in Sweetwater. Words seem inadequate." "They are," Eleanor agreed softly. "But I accept them nonetheless. Not because you deserve forgiveness, father, but because I deserve peace." He nodded in understanding. "Hayes is a good man," he said after a moment. "Better than I ever was to your mother. He'll give you the life you deserve." "Yes, he will," Eleanor confirmed. "And I'll do the same for him." Another knock at the door signaled that it was time. Harold offered his arm and Eleanor took it, ready to walk toward her future. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the house, beneath an arch of roses and wildflowers that the ranch hands had constructed under Mrs. Abernathy's direction. Hunter waited there, looking more handsome than Eleanor had ever seen him in a new black suit and crisp white shirt. The love in his eyes as he watched her approach on her father's arm made her heart swell with happiness. Judge Wilson, a friend of Hunter's who had traveled from the territorial capital for the occasion, performed the ceremony. The vows were traditional but spoken with profound sincerity, each word a promise neither intended to break. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared finally. "You may kiss your bride, Judge Hayes." Hunter drew Eleanor into his arms, his kiss tender yet possessive, a perfect reflection of the man himself. The assembled guests, ranch hands, neighbors, friends, and family burst into applause and cheers. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than even the hungry ranch hands could consume. Eleanor danced with her new husband, with her father, with her brother-in-law, and even with young Jimmy Wilson, who declared solemnly that she was the prettiest teacher ever, even if she was mighty strict about spelling. As the night grew late, Hunter found her sitting on the porch, taking a moment's respite from the festivities. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his voice warm with love. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. "And you?" "Completely." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I was thinking about that day in Sweetwater. If someone had told me then that the woman on the auction block would become my wife, I would have thought them mad. And if someone had told me that the stern-faced stranger who bit on me would become the love of my life, I would have been equally skeptical," Eleanor agreed with a smile. "Yet here we are, Hunter echoed, drawing her close. "And here we'll stay, building our life together, come what may." The music from inside drifted out to them, a slow, sweet melody that invited closeness. Hunter stood and offered his hand to Eleanor. "One more dance with my wife before we bid our guests good night," he suggested, his eyes dark with promise. Eleanor placed her hand in his without hesitation, rising to move into his embrace. As they swayed together beneath the star-filled sky, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together not as protector and protected, but as equal partners in love and life. 10 years later, Judge Hunter Hayes sat on the porch of the Flying H, watching his children play in the yard. 8-year-old Thomas, named for loyal Tom Abernathy, who had passed away 5 years prior, was showing his 6-year-old sister Margaret how to throw a lasso, using a fence post as their target. 4-year-old James toddled after his siblings, determined to be included in their game despite his young age. "They're getting better," Eleanor observed, settling into the chair beside her husband's. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, where their 4th child would make his or her appearance in just a few months. "They have a good teacher," Hunter replied with a smile, reaching over to cover her hand with his own. "Just like their mother." Eleanor had continued teaching even after their marriage, expanding the small school at the Flying H to accommodate children from several neighboring ranches. With Hunter's encouragement, she had also established a lending library that served the entire community, housed in a small building that had once been a storage shed. Hunter's career as a circuit judge had flourished over the past decade. His reputation for fairness and integrity had spread throughout the territory, and there was talk of a potential appointment to the Territorial Supreme Court in the future. Eleanor occasionally accompanied him on his circuit rides, particularly during school holidays, leaving the children in Mrs. Abernathy's capable care. Vernon Blackwood had left Sweetwater years ago after a series of bad investments had depleted his fortune. The threat he had once posed was long forgotten, just an unpleasant memory from the early days of their relationship. Harold Montgomery visited twice a year, sober and steady, a doting grandfather who brought handcrafted wooden toys for the children and stories of his life on the Circle J, where he had risen to become foreman. His relationship with Eleanor had healed gradually, built on his consistent efforts to make amends and her willingness to allow him the opportunity. The Flying H itself had prospered under their joint stewardship. Hunter's innovative ranching methods and Eleanor's careful management of the household accounts had increased both the size and profitability of the operation. They employed over 30 ranch hands now, many of whom had been with them for years, loyal to the family that treated them with respect and fairness. "Penny for your thoughts," Hunter said, noticing Eleanor's contemplative expression. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, from that terrible day in Sweetwater to this life we've built together." Hunter pressed a kiss to her temple. "The best decision I ever made was riding into town that day." "The best decision I ever made was trusting you when you said I was yours to protect," Eleanor replied softly. "Though I think we've moved well beyond protection to partnership." "Indeed we have, my love." Hunter's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Indeed we have." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Hayes family gathered on the porch of the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the bonds of love, trust, and mutual respect that had transformed two lonely souls into a family. The journey that had begun in desperation on an auction block had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined, a testament to the power of love to heal wounds and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings.